So good morning again. Our theme for the month has been the art and science of gratitude. And our talk today is grateful through life's challenges. But before we start, I always like to begin with a little joke, if that's okay with everybody. So a train was going through Kansas and it derailed. They lost all of their power. They seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. So people got off the train because all of a sudden it was so hot, cold, whatever, and they were trying to find a place to stay. So there were three people that kind of hooked up, three men. One was a rabbi, one was a Hindu priest, and one was an evangelical minister with a little bit of a shady past about finances. So as he joined the group, they were walking and they saw a farmhouse. And they thought, oh, thank God, we have a place to stay for tonight. So they got to the farmhouse and the farmer welcomed them and he said, you know, I only have room, I have 2 extra bedrooms, but he said the third person will have to sleep in the barn, if that's okay. Well, they were just delighted to have a place to stay. So he said, well, who would like to go to the barn? And the Hindu priest said, I'll be the first, I'll go. So out he went and they got settled in the house and pretty soon there was a knock on the door. And the Hindu priest said, I'm so sorry I can't stay out there. He said, because there are cows out there and cows are sacred. And he said, I can't sleep in the same place with cows. So they said, well, come on in. So the rabbi said, don't worry, I'll go out there. I'll spend the night in the barn. So he went out and pretty soon he came back and knocked on the door and the farmer said, now what? And he said, well, there are pigs out there. And he said, you know, pigs are unclean in my faith. He said, so I can't stay out there. So the evangelical minister said, all right. He said, you guys really. He said, I'll go out there. I'll show you how it's done. So out he went. Pretty soon there was a knock on the door. It was the cow and the pig. So, anyway, in our daily guide not long ago, Reverend Teresa Lee, who's the minister of our church in Hilton Head, South Carolina, tells the story of how she met her husband through Unity. And they decided they were LUTs, licensed Unity teachers. And they wanted to go on and be ministers. So he said, well, why don't we just move to Kansas City? And he said, we'll enroll in ministerial school. That will be our honeymoon for the next 2 years. He said, we will be on a 2-year honeymoon on our ministerial track. So they went ahead and they went through ministerial school and they were doing so well. And one morning, they had breakfast, he kissed her goodbye, and he was on his way to church, and she was going to follow. And as he closed the door, she didn't hear the car start. So she looked outside, and he was laying on the sidewalk. He had had a massive heart attack and died. She was 53, and he was 53. So she went into such a deep and dark place. She just couldn't pull herself out of it. She said, here we were a force for good, and we just finished starting this ministry. And she said she just kept tumbling down and down, and I think we all know what that can be like. And she said she had a dream one night, and she said what the dream said to her, very loud and clear, said, Teresa, live what you know. Live your unity principles. So she decided to try to pull herself out, go back to her unity principles. And the first unity principle we have is God is absolute and everywhere present. So if God is everywhere present, God had to be somewhere in there. There had to be a gift. If we believe that there is one life, that life is the life of God, that life is everywhere present, it is around us, and it is within us. Then she started to focus on that. If God is there, there has to be good in it. So as she looked for the good, of course, her life started to evolve and to change. And I was thinking with the story of Myrtle Fillmore, when she received a diagnosis as Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, of TB, and that was a death diagnosis at the time. She went back into that principle. If God is everywhere present, God is here right now too. And through the years, she healed herself through her prayer, through her meditation, through knowing that God has not just left her with TB and God was somewhere else. God was there and there had to be a gift in it somewhere. And she healed herself. You know, there's a story about a boy, a young man, who was a Unity follower. He knew the principles. And he went to India because he wanted to further his spiritual development. And he heard about a cave in India. And so he went to where this cave was in a far corner of India. And the legend was nobody ever got through that cave. Nobody did. However, if they got through the cave, they achieved enlightenment. But in the meantime, in the cave, every single fear popped up. Every point of grief jumped out. Through their whole life, every possible thing that could frighten them jumped out at them. And the old Indian priest said to him, he said, nobody's ever made it. Nobody, in all of these 100 years, nobody has ever been able to get through that cave. And the young man said, I want to try it. And he said, well, then you go at your own risk. So the young man walked through the cave, and all of his fears, and all of his setbacks, and all of his grief were all around him, just echoing in this cave, loudly and clearly, where he could barely hear himself think. But he also had that faith that if God is everywhere present, God is here too. And so he walked through that cave. He walked through the darkness. He walked through the night. And he got to the end of the cave. And when he walked out, the old priest, the Indian priest, was there. And he said, you are the only one that's ever gotten through all of this. He said, you now have achieved enlightenment. So we walk through those storms knowing that God is everywhere present, right? And if no matter what happens, and you know, life is problematic. In Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, that's his first line. Life is problematic. We're not here to absolutely enjoy the rose garden all the way through. But what we are here to do is know that no matter how many thorns there are, our unity principles will stand through that storm and get us through. One life, one activity going on, and if God is all there is, then God is right there too. And there will be the strength if we are open to and receptive to the fact that God is more than the grief. Amen. Thank you. So the second one is I have a spark of divinity. I am I'm inherently good. So if I'm inherently good, I have this spark of divinity in me, then why do bad things happen to good people? You know, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote that book. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, I don't know why. You know, Rick, I'm going to pull a complete blank, I know it as well as Rick Warren, who has the largest Baptist church, and it's a very progressive Baptist church. He's down in Saddleback in Orange County, California. And he himself has gone through so much, the loss of a child, and through cancer with his wife. And many years ago, after 9/11, he was on Larry King's show. And Larry King said, okay, Pastor. He said, you know, you pastor 50,000 people. And he said, I want to know, and you've written Counselor's book, why? Why did 9/11 happen? And Rick replied, and I never forgot it. He said, I don't know the answer. And there are things we just don't know. So it's not why they happened, it's what we're going to do with what is the lesson here? If I'm in, why is a spin question? We can ask ourselves why till the cows come home and have no answer. Every now and again we may catch a glimpse why. But for the most part, the lesson that unity teaches us here, don't go into the why, go to the what. What can I learn here? What are you here to teach me? And that sounds like a bunch of psychobabble sometimes, right in the middle of depression or loss. But it's not. It's not the why. Oh God, why? Or why did you punish me? What did I ever do to deserve this? Well, the answer is nothing. Nothing. Life happens. And are we equipped to handle life as it happens? So it's not the why, it's the what. And we look at people like the 9/11 survivors. Some of them became hopeless alcoholics. That's a true story. There's been statistics done on it. Some committed suicide. Some wrote books. Some went on speaking circuits of how they got through it. Some went on with their life. We are always a choice how we handle things. And that's not to say that we don't go through the grief. We do. And if we don't go through the grief, we're not spiritual bypass people. We don't say, oh, it's all good. Well, it's not all good on the human level. And that's the truth. On the spiritual realm, everything is here to teach us. And the promise is you will never walk alone. So on the spiritual level, we are okay. But it's also all right to say on the human level, it's not all good. And boy, if someone says that to me in the middle of something, oh, it's all good, Barbara, I just want to sock them right in the face. It's not all good in this moment. Now, what am I going to do with it? I can live there, or I can go on with life. That spark of divinity is within us. And do I call it forth and let that spark move into a flame, or do I just ignore the spark and let it sit there where all the time something is knocking at us? I'm here for you. I am always with you. I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you, right? And that is the truth. That's what we hold to be self-evident, so to speak. That is the truth. We never walk alone, no matter what. So the third unity principle is I create my experience by the activity of my thoughts, of my thinking. So I talked to Mary on the way in today, and I'm so glad you came because I didn't know how to text you last night. But so I create my experience by the activity of my thoughts. So let me start with a woman, and I think I probably told this story before, and then I want to get to Mary. I was at a hair salon years ago, and there was a woman that came in. Maybe she was, I don't know, in her 50s. And probably that time it seemed old to me. Now it's so young. But she was going around talking to every person. I thought, oh dear Lord, please don't let her come to me. So anyway, she showed up, and she went through this whole story of her husband dying of cancer, and how horrible it was, and the experience, and all she went through, and all he went through. And I finally said to her, I said, well, when did this happen? And she said, 27 years ago. She had ruminated all these years. Her life never went on. It stopped there. Now, life went on. Her life did not. So I was talking to Mary, who is just a marvelous human being. And I don't know the full story, Mary. Maybe someday you'll come up and tell us. But I know you went through so much with Wally and cancer and his death. How long were you married, Mary? 56 years. Let's get the chills. So Mary went through her grieving process, which I can't even imagine. But Mary could show up, and there's more to this story, I know, so I'm not trying to make little of it. Mary went through so much, but she kept showing up. She kept showing up at Unity. And as life moved on, who appeared but David? Now, Mary had to be open to that. She could have closed down and spent the rest of her life in mourning about David, or about her Wally, Not that her mourning has ever stopped. The grief is always there. You know, that grief is with us. But she went on with her life. And that's what we do. We either do or we don't. She met David. They're moving to Italy. She has a beautiful life. But she walked through the storm, and she knew enough about unity principles to walk on through the storm and see what life held on the other side, right? So anyway, you are a beautiful example to us both of you. And thank you for that. It's a great lesson. We never know. The only thing we know for sure is life changes on a dime. It changes. You know, in 12-step work, they say, don't leave before the miracle, right? Don't leave before the miracle. So, you know, in the Bible, there are 415 times the phrase is, and it came to pass. Now, I'm not saying that the grief doesn't linger, because grief does linger. There's always that, every now and again, where it almost doubles you in two. But it came to pass. Do we give thanks for what we had? Do we rejoice in that? Or do we stop? You know, they say a rut, which the 27-year woman that was still walking around telling you, she was in a rut. And that rut is a shallow grave. Remember that. When we are in a rut, it is nothing more than a shallow grave. So the next thing is we create our experience. The fourth principle is prayer is creative thinking that heightens our awareness of God mind. Prayer, it's not begging and beseeching God, oh my God, please, please. It is knowing, as Emerson said, prayer from the highest possibility. Let me just think exactly what Emerson says here. Prayer is never beseeching God, begging or beseeching God. It is seeing life from the highest possibility thinking. So it's not that, oh God, prayer is creative thinking. I'm a sinner, please help me. You know, when something happens to people and they say, well, you know, I'm being punished for this. It has nothing to do with being punished for anything. God is not a punishing God. The world is crazy, we know that. The universe is perfect. It is God's universe that is always in divine order. It is always on time and in time. It is the peace that passes all human understanding. That is creative thinking. And when we go upstairs to that thinking, then miracles happen. Mary and David happen. Myrtle Fillmore happens. All kinds of wonderful things. But keep your prayer. And if you go to that place, and sometimes we do, it's a default. Reverend Michael Beckwith used to say, you know, even the most evolved people were like computers. When the computer goes down and then it reboots, it goes back to default settings. And he used to say, it's not that when bad things happen to good people. He said the default settings come back in and they bring us back into these places of worry, of doubt and fear. And he said, I don't care how evolved anybody is, they will at times go back. He said, it's not the times that you slip back. How fast do we get out? You know, how fast can we get back to the point of God is all there is? One life, that life is my life now. And how creative will my thinking be? Because we can create either way. We can create that I am born of sin, or we can create the fact, which is the truth, I am a living blessing. And wherever I go, there is a power and presence within me for good that will lift me, that will guide me, and that will sustain me. And they also say, what do we say? Every thought is a prayer. The universe misses nothing. The universe is all around us. Every thought is a prayer. How many of the 70,000 thoughts we think a day are uplifting? How many thoughts tell us, I am a beloved child of God? How many? How many, instead of saying, why did this happen, God? What am I here to learn from this? How can I move on with my life? Because life will move on. and it will move on with us or without us. Mary and David are a marvelous example. Life is moving on for them to a whole new life, which is so beautiful. Either the glass is half full or it's half empty. So prayer is creative thinking that heightens our awareness. So how many prayers will you be saying this week? If our thoughts are prayers too, how many really thoughts of gratitude will we be thinking this week? Of all that we have give thanks for. And you know, if the election is still heavy on our souls, we just have to know that if God is all there is, God is there too. It has to be. That is the law. Jesus said, "Thank you, Father. I know you always hear me." So every prayer, every thought this week, let it raise up. Emma Curtis Hopkins, the teacher of teachers who taught the Fillmore, says, stay upstairs. How many of our thoughts will be in that heavenly consciousness of God is all there is. I am one with God, and I never walk alone, no matter what the journey seems. And then the last principle, let me just go through once more. The first principle, God is absolute, and that is the truth. There's an absolute. That is science. If it's absolute, there's no question. The second principle is I have a spark of divinity. That within us is always there. That is the thing that carries us, that lifts us, and it's always knocking. But it has to be invited. How many times will I say, in the prayer, God help me. And it's not from God help me from up there, my poor sinner. It's God all around me and within me. Show me how I get through this, because I don't humanly know. That divine spark within us, let's keep that lit. You know, we're going to do our candle lighting service next week, but let's know that that fire is there. Will we stoke it this week? Or will we stamp it down? And while we can never stamp it down, we can sure hamper that, because we won't let it out. We would rather go into worry, doubt, and fear. That's not what unity is about here. Unity is a positive path to Christianity. The last thing, or third thing, is I create my experience by the activity of my thinking. Where will my thinking take me this week? Will it take me high? Will it, no matter what the news says, will I go over that knowing that this is a country under God, one nation under God, and no matter what the appearance, somehow God is there, and we will move through this. You know, I leave the past behind, St. Paul said. I'm going to paraphrase because I think of this so often. I was talking to my grandson. In fact, he's my oldest grandson. He texted me this morning. He said, I'm thinking about your sermon this morning. He said, tell me if it goes well. I'll let you be the judge. But anyway, St. Paul says, I leave the past behind, and with arms outstretched to whatever lies ahead, I go straight for the goal. So isn't that the truth? No matter what the past has been, I'm going to leave it behind. I don't have to forget it, but I'm not going to ruminate there. And I open myself to the blessings that are to come. And the last, prayer is creative thinking. How much of our prayer work, our thoughts will be creative this week? What we can do, not what we can't do, but what we can do. You know, this is a can-do world. I can do it because I don't walk alone. And the last thing is we must live the truth that we know it. Now, I have my own story to tell on this. 7 years ago, my younger son, who has 3 children, he lives here in Dallas, and he got upset with his sister and I over something. And he has had nothing to do with us ever since. We cannot see the children. And so it's been 7 years. And 7 years in a child's life is a very long time. So what do I do with this? What do I do? Do I live the truth that it's not the why? And I've gone through the why a lot. And do I still go through it? About 3 weeks ago, I could not stop crying. I spent 2 days, I just couldn't pull myself back together. But I have to know the truth, that if God is everywhere present, God is in that situation. And I have to know the truth that unity teaches. Every prayer is answered. Now, the trick to that is I have to remind myself that it's not always answered in my time frame. And I really have to live by that. And I have to know, sometimes I think, are you not listening to me? I'm missing my children growing up. You know, they're teens now. One's going off to college. And then I fear, I think, well, maybe I wouldn't even recognize them anymore. But I have to go back to unity principles. God is all there is. It is a creative universe. Every prayer, every thought is a prayer. And every prayer the universe hears and works through. The prayer is answered. I just have to know. And it sounds trite, but it's the truth. God's got this. I don't have an answer to the why. I have to know that the what, that this will evolve in God's timing. And the truth of it is, as Charles Fillmore believed in reincarnation, I think I just hope it's in this lifetime, you know. But what I do know for each one of us here is God is all there is. And we either go on with our life or we don't. And we have a perfect example in this church of Mary and David. And I do know that spark of divinity is within us, and we can call it forth and move through whatever it is, whatever storm. I'm not saying that it's not all good, because on the human level, it's not. But there's a power and presence in this universe that will help us, guide us, lead us, and direct us. And each one of us made an agreement from all eternity to be here now, to walk through these storms, and to have the faith. And we are so grateful to be in a unity church that teaches these principles, these life principles, that no matter what, God is. No matter what, God is my life. No matter what, I can change my life by changing my thinking. And I can create through my prayer work the life that I want. Now, it may not be that we are living in a castle. It doesn't matter. I've been in the streets of Peru with these kids that play soccer with yarn balls, and they're as happy as can be. So it has nothing to do with money or power. It's the thought within us, and it's the God self of us that is so beautiful, that will never leave, because that is the promise again. I will never leave or forsake you. And now I would like to end with a very theological story. And it's the story of the 3 pigs. Are you ready? Are you ready? We're going to switch right now. So remember the old story, maybe some of you are too young to remember, where the mother pig has 3 little triplet pigs, and all of a sudden she can't really afford to feed them anymore. So she sends them out into the world to make their own way, and 2 of them are very lazy. So when they all decide to build their house, one builds it of straw, and another builds it of hay. And there's a big bad wolf that they know is around. But the 3rd little pig was very smart, and he picked up bricks and stones, and that's how he made his house sturdy. So the first little pig that had the house of straw, the big bad wolf comes and blows. I will huff and I will puff and I will blow your house down. And sure enough, the house goes down. So the little pig runs to his brother, who has built it of hay, and his brothers they're curled up together, and the big bad wolf's at the door and says, I will huff, I will puff, and I blow your house down. And he did. So the 2 little pigs scampered out to their brother, who was the more ambitious one, and he built his house of stones and bricks, and they got in there and they're all hiding. And the big bad wolf comes to the door and says, I'm going to huff and puff and blow your house down. So he huffs and he puffs and he puffs and he huffs and he huffs, but he can't blow the house down because it is made of sturdy brick and stone. And that's us. That's why we're here, to build that house inside of us that is so strong that no matter when the winds blow, when that big wolf comes, no matter whether it's the loss of a job, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a child, whatever it is, that it will not blow our house down. Now, it may take a shingle or two off the roof, but it will not blow our house down, because what we know is God is there all the time, every time. And we have that spark of divinity with us that will lift us, carry us, guide us through the darkest tunnel until we reach the end of the tunnel and truly become enlightened once more. So let's take a deep breath together. Oh. And so we just give thanks and gratitude for being here today and for being in a unity church that teaches us these beautiful principles, that I am a living blessing to life itself, and that I never walk alone. I walk with the presence and the power and the grace of God through whatever storm, whatever happens, God is there and God is more. And so it is. Amen.